The next session is Indian Air Force in its centennial decade. And this informative session will focus on discussions related to Indian Air Force, IAF heritage, traditions, how air power can be a beckoning force beyond the boundaries. The panel will also be discussing the role of Indian Air Force in the ever-changing global world, its footprints, as well as the role of the UN peacekeeping force operations that highlighted the might of our Indian Air Force in world politics. For this, I would like to invite on stage our panelists for today for this particular session. May I please invite Group Captain Dr. Swaim, Prakash Singh, Senior Fellow, CAPS, Air Vice Marshal Tejbir Singh, AVSM VM ACAS Operations TNH IAF. Air Vice Marshal Rajesh Isser, AVSM VM retired, Distinguished Fellow CAPS, and Mr. Anchit Gupta. Can we have all of you on stage, please, sirs? Can I please request all of you for a picture, for a group picture for our camera person?
Ladies and gentlemen, I think the festival is suffering from fatigue at the end. Coming to the penultimate session of this festival, uh, the Indian Air Force, as it enters its centennial decade, celebrated its 91st anniversary a little over 2 weeks ago this month. And I think the Indian Air Force, what it has achieved in its existence in the last 90 years has only been possible because of the valor, the sacrifice, uh, and the dedication, integrity, professionalism of all its veterans, who have given this foundation to the Air Force. Uh, I think to give you all an overview of the rich tapestry of this wonderful organization, which today is the envy of many air forces in the world. Uh, I have the privilege and honor of having a very eminent panel amongst you all this afternoon. We have Anchit Gupta, who's an Air Force, brat, and I think his passion for the Air Force history, traditions, legacy is something which should be the envy of many. And I think he's acknowledged not only in India but across the world by his writings and his tweets and all. So we are very privileged to have you, Anchit. It's a pleasure to have you with us. We also have Air Vice Marshal Tejbir Singh, who's an old colleague, and I think I admire his zest for life, his enthusiasm, and his spirit of can do, despite all odds. And he's had the privilege of having commanded the first special, raised and commanded the first special operations unit of the Indian Air Force, the C-130J, which has achieved many laurels for the nation. And I think he's going to tell us something more about that. Uh, I also have my course mate from NDA, Air Vice Marshal Rajesh Isser, who's been a decorated, helicopter pilot. He's published a couple of books, 4 books to be precise, having written on helicopter operations, on counter-insurgency operations. And he's also a soldier scholar who's pursuing his PhD on leadership challenges in disaster management and relief. And the last speaker, on the panel that we have is Dr. Swaim Prakash Singh, who's an old colleague. He's again a soldier scholar who's serving and presently is a senior fellow at the Center for Air Power Studies. So over to you.
Thank you, USI and CAPS, for giving me this opportunity. I'll quickly run through my presentation. It's a kind of a storytelling through pictures on the journey of air defense. As per Union War Book, the responsibility of air defense of Indian sovereign space, including the combat zone, island territories, offshore installations, airspace at sea, is vested with Indian Air Force. And air defense can be simplistically put as the employment of a combination of passive and active measures to nullify or reduce the effectiveness of enemy aerial attack. The process of air defense involves detection, identification, interception, and destruction, and I shall only touch upon the first three aspects. It's important to get into the historical perspective before we see the Indian journey. Go back to 1940, Battle of Britain, World War II. The Marshal of the Royal Air Force, Sir William Douglas, he said, and I quote, "I think we can say that the Battle of Britain might never have been won if it were not for the radar chain." So that is the significance of air defense. Britain, they had put a chain of radars, and this provided the early warning for all the German aerial attack. And it actually was not only the radar chain, but also the control and reporting organization, which was called as Dowding System of Control Organization. So you can see on the left panel, left side of the screen, entire Britain was divided into various groups and sectors where all these radar chains provided the information, and thereafter that information was percolated down to ground control, interception, and early warning radars and fighter aircraft to take tactical actions. And this is an interesting picture of a command and control center inside the Dowding system. Here you can see that the entire battle space was recreated on a horizontal plotting board. You can see the aircraft model which were moved from one place to another depending upon the early warning information what they got. On the first floor, you can see they are the decision makers who actually had the bird's eye view of entire battle space, and they orchestrated the air operations accordingly. Coming back to India during partition, all our military assets got split, and actually India did not have anything worthwhile as far as air defense is concerned. However, we started rebuilding things, and in 1948, our first radar unit, which was formed next door at Palam, and it became the first signal unit of Air Force with Type 11 and Type 13 class of radar. In next 10 years or so, when the IF was building up, there was a need felt to have a control and reporting school, which was raised at Jodhpur along Air Force Flying College. Post 1962, the debacle of 1962 war, then our air defense got further augmented with another Type 4, Type 15 class of radar, and few more radars with longer ranges, ANTPS class and MPS class were also inducted. ANFPS 89 and FPS 100 were the radar which were a mainstay at that point of time for substantial period. One interesting thing to note that one aircraft which is picked up on scope, its size was as big as 18 kilometers. So that is the kind of inaccuracies we had during that time. Post 1962 and modernization of Air Force, it was decided that we need to have medium and high powered radar and static in nature. So 6 American Star Sapphire radars were contracted, and these all were placed mainly looking at China in the Central and Eastern Air Command. Post 1962, we also see arrival of Russian radars. P-30M is a very interesting radar. Some other time we can have stories on that. And P-40 was another radar on tank chassis, and I had the privilege to serve in the last unit of the Indian Air Force, last P-40 unit. In 1965, as far as our interceptors on ground are concerned, the first SA-2 missile was commissioned in 1965. Unit was 50 Squadron, which later got resurrected as the first AVAX Squadron. Again, I happen to have served in that unit. This is the radar orbit of 1965. You can see that Star Sapphire and static radars along with SAM-2 acquisition radars, they were on the early warning chain. In 1971, the radar orbit was a little more strengthened, and we had a control and reporting system with ADDC GCIs in place. Post 1971, there was another need felt that our CNR school, which was raised at Jodhpur, need to be relocated, and it was relocated and upgraded as AD College, went to the present location of Memora in Lucknow, along with AD flight at Bakshika Talab. This AD College was honored with President's Standard and Colors in 2018. These are few pictures of Russian radars of P-12, P-18, P-15, P-19 class of radars. SAM-3 Pichora, which is a very effective surface-to-air guided missile, which is still in service, was inducted in 1977 in 220 series of squadrons. The first truly combat radar of Indian Air Force was ST-68U and UM, which is on the mast. You can see in center the dual scope. This was a revolution in control and reporting system and controlling capability. Two fighter controllers could sit together and they can simultaneously control offensive and defensive operations. Modernization of AGIS saw the decade of 80s and 90s, where French high-powered radar THT 1955, it was placed all pan-India. Also French TRS-2215 and later indigenously built PSM-33. And now we have medium-powered radars. These are a few pictures of indigenous radars, all manufactured by DRDO and Bell, Indra, Mark 1, 2, Rohini, and low-level tracking radars. Wherever our mobile radars and static radars could not reach, we have highly mobile radars called L, low-level lightweight radar, which could be easily heli-lifted, and it is doing a wonderful job. Further air defense was augmented by aerostat, two aerostats, and later in 2000 we had inducted AVAX and AWC, eye in the sky. So this is the kind of evolution of through scopes. You can see the wall version rugged scopes to TFT and LED screens now. From horizontal, we move to vertical plotting board, and now we have large screen display in our IACCS. And this is the kind of AD response what we get. I'll just quickly play a clip. So in case of any threat detected, the scramble procedure is done, the ORP gets activated, and pilot is preparing for getting airborne. So this is the kind of response, and one of the result of that response was in 1999, 10th of August, where we shot down the Pakistan Navy Atlantic aircraft in Kutch area. Today we have IACCS, and you can see that we have all kind of weapon system, from close-in weapon system to long-range missile systems and AD interceptors. And this is the IACCS architecture. You can see all army network, naval sensors, civilian radar sensors. They all are hooked up, and all the airborne assets also flying in the air, they are on airborne network, and everything is being controlled from IACCS. And we have the capability of controlling the entire air operations pan-India from IACCS ops room. Recently, Raksha Mantri Rajnath Singh, he visited one of the tactical nodes to see how this air operations are conducted in view of theaterization. Also to remind you, ladies and gentlemen, IF erected an air defense shield over Delhi during G20. So whatever you saw on television, it was not only that, the entire Delhi area was made Air Force Sky Fortress by Air Force through IACCS and organizations called JCAC and ODC. Future is that we need to induct the space segment also to it, and we will graduate from air, land, and maritime domain to cyberspace and space. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for a very quick run-up on journey of air defense. Thank you.
Honorable Chair, our distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for giving me an opportunity to speak on a topic enlarging global footprint of Indian Air Force. The office that I sit on the 5th floor in Air Headquarters, which seats the Operations Directorate. I remember I visited that office 25 years back, and there was a big map of India and its neighborhood. Today, that office has two wall-sized maps of the world, political and air routes, which I refer to every day. This is the transition the Indian Air Force has seen over the years as it looks around the world in its global footprint. As you know, soon after the birth of Indian Air Force and inception of Vapati aircraft 90 years back, we were bombing targets in North Waziristan from Viran Shah in Pakistan, just 25 kilometers outside the airbase. Earlier this year, we undertook an exercise and simulated target more than 4,000 kilometers away from the airbases that they were launched from. This is the lethality and range of Indian Air Force today. On another role altogether, after the independence, Kashmir operations with limited Dakotas, and then the mayhem of post-partition and later succor to the people in Poonch, was provided by Indian Air Force. But today, Indian Air Force swings into action immediately when there is a humanitarian crisis across. And as I speak today, one of our aircrafts is offloading aid near Gaza, which took off at 8 in the morning. That is the reach of Indian Air Force today. Needless to say that over the years, Indian Air Force has evolved, modernized, and adapted to the geopolitical changes and the landscape that the world has today. Our global footprint has expanded many times, not only on humanitarian roles, but also as far as evacuations and expeditionary forces are concerned. So I will touch upon three strands quickly in the next few minutes. First, our capability as an expeditionary force. Secondly, disaster. And thirdly, evacuate our diaspora. Our global reach is underpinned by our strategic mobility, which enables us to deploy very rapidly these days. To far locations, the ability to conduct long-range missions with aerial refueling has been a game changer. 20 years back, Indian Air Force participated in the first real international exercise called COP Thunder 2004 in Alaska. It took 20 days to ferry 4 Jaguar aircraft with 2 refuelers to reach Alaska, 20 days to take part in the exercise, and 20 days to get back. In all, the aircrafts were out for more than 2 months out of base. In July this year, we flew 4 Rafale aircraft for Bastille Day celebrations to Paris. We flew them directly in 10 hours, giving them 3 dockings en route. This is the expeditionary capability of Indian Air Force, its ability to reach far, and the mobility we have today. This brings me to another aspect that based on our expanding reach, our aspirations, participation of armed forces in joint international exercises has increased manifold in the last few years. This year itself, there have been 40 international exercises, out of which half of them have been in foreign soils. Some of them dry service, some of them with Indian Army and Indian Air Force. Last week, a C-17 ferried back our brave soldiers from Alaska after exercise Yuddha Abhyas. Undoubtedly, these international exercises are a crucial component of our modern military cooperation and diplomacy. This has been made possible due to IAF's strategic platforms like C-17, C-130 and air-to-air refuelers. It also showcases India's technological prowess, as we did in exercise Desert Flag UAE, where we deployed Made in India Tejas, showcasing our confidence to pitch it against the best in an exercise and exhibiting our military prowess. This indeed is a sign of expanding Atmanirbharta. On humanitarian assistance, the IF has emerged as a key player in providing immediate relief, natural disasters and humanitarian crisis in the neighbors and beyond. We all remember how we responded during tsunami. During Nepal earthquake, I remember landing the first aircraft within 4 hours of the earthquake. The first real test of international disaster came in 2005 when we launched an IL-76 to USA after Hurricane Katrina. Again, it took 4 days for India to decide to send the aid or not, another 1 week to decide what to send, and another 8 days to reach there. After 20 days, when the aircraft landed in Little Rock, Arkansas, everything was done, and very reluctantly, the aid was taken, much to the dismay of the crew. Today, the things are different. Turkey, 20 years later, we launched immediately in Op Dost, flew 28 sorties to provide succor. Visuals on BBC and Al Jazeera of Indian Air Force landing in Adana, Turkey, does have a desired global impact for the Indian Air Force and armed forces. And rightly, our Prime Minister, after this operation, said, India is always ready to be the first responder wherever there is crisis in the world. It is reflective of his confidence in our capability, capacity, and credibility. One cannot forget COVID diplomacy when aircrafts were flying all over the world, distributing vaccinations and giving medicines. Talking about evacuations, India has over 30 million diaspora living around the world. 2/3 of them are born in India. IF has shown credibility to conduct evacuation operations during times of crisis from disaster-stricken regions with tremendous success. These operations not only demonstrates IF global reach, but also reinforce the perception that India can safeguard its citizens anywhere in the world. Our reaction after Libya 2011, Yemen 2015, which took days and months, but during Op Ganga in February 2022, in 6 days, over 3,000 citizens were evacuated after the crisis from Ukraine. Airlift of over 700 out of Kabul in gory scenes when we saw Afghanis falling out of American aircraft was done seamlessly with minimum support to aircraft when they had left India. Not many nations can pull out a small bunch of stranded countrymen and women from a distant, isolated place like Wadi, Sudan, in a very professionally executed special ops NVG mission undertaken 5,000 kilometers away from India. This is a clear sign of a leading air force with global reach. To conclude, let me just say that the global reach of Indian Air Force is reflecting of its evolving modern role and also that of Shining India. Our participation in international exercises, humanitarian missions, and strategic partnerships underscores India's commitment to regional and global stability. I would be failing if I do not mention the seamless synergy which has built between ministries, Special Ministry of External Affairs, IDS, and all three service headquarters, NDMA, and so on, to respond very quickly across the world, as we did yesterday. It's in the evening that I got a call that we have to launch an aircraft, and 8 in the morning it was airborne. As the IF continues to modernize and expand its capability, it will play an increasing important role in shaping the geopolitical landscape and protecting India's interest on the global stage. Thank you very much for your patient listening.
Thank you, Tejbir, for giving us an overview of the strategic reach and mobility of the Indian Air Force. We now move to AVM Rajesh Isser, who's going to talk to us about IF and UN peacekeeping operations.
Chair, panel members, and friends. I'll quickly cover, because since we are already way beyond time, about the Indian Air Force role in UN peacekeeping. Unlike the Indian Army, which has continued for decades, the Indian Air Force has initially gone only in spurts, and then for about an 8-10 year this thing, only for the reason, not that the UN doesn't want us, basically the requirement at home and the reasons that Marshal Tejbir just covered, the requirement to get deployed from here, etc., is far more important. So the first time the IAF was called was during ONUC in Congo in 1960 to 1964. They flew. It was an emergency call because one entire province, the size of I think half of it, most of our states, bigger than most of our states, had rebelled, and the UN was caught. And Canberra, 6 Canberras flew all the way from India through West Asia and down, and got into the combat role, and they saved the situation there for a long time. There are some lovely books written on that episode quite lately, just about 5 years back. The next operation that we took part was in the infamous Somalia operations, which had to be left halfway in between because the Americans suffered those famous 2 Black Hawk loss. But we had deployed anti-tank guided missile equipped Chetaks. And of course, in hindsight, it was a wrong decision. United Nations needed more capability, and so the message that time was wrong, but yet they did whatever they best they could. In Sierra Leone, again, the United Nations faced a critical situation, and the Indian Air Force was called in November 1999, and they continued till February 2001. And if you remember that famous Op Khokri, when a company-sized force of mostly Indian soldiers, Gorkhas, were trapped by these rebels and were not allowed to go out. They had to be maintained by air, and somehow they had to be rescued. In the process, one of our aircrafts went down because of mechanical problems and left in the wild, and it was, everything was picked up as a souvenir from that aircraft by rebels. And after many months, not only was that aircraft recovered. It was recovered in a very Herculean task. More importantly, in a joint operation, Operation Khukri, all the Indian soldiers were rescued and escorted back in a very famous operation, which has a couple of books on the same operations. Uh, we also deployed in Sudan, UNMISS in April 2005, continued till 2010, mostly Mi-17 helicopters to support that entire mission. Again, we had to get back because we were running out of helicopters to counter our red corridor. We needed a lot of helicopters there, so we had to withdraw all our helicopters from Sudan and the Congo. And of course, MONUC, of which the lady talked about earlier in the earlier session, we continued that mission between July 2003 to 2010. Here are some visuals from the various missions. So, in a nutshell, the resources were 6 Canberra in 61-62, 80 GM Chetak helicopters that I talked about. In Sierra Leone, we sent Mi-8s, Chetaks and the attack helicopter Mi-25, which engaged very, very robustly in Sierra Leone. Then to Congo, we sent the Mi-25, Mi-35s and the Mi-17s, whereas in Sudan, only the Mi-17s. Just a quick word, helicopters of IAF, play a very, very multifarious role. One is, if you see this diagram, it is basically an insurgency. You define an insurgent, he is the insurgent and he is the government, which itself is a very difficult task. And then the air power, which you see on top, supports both good governance as well as the military power that impacts on that insurgency. Once you have separated the insurgency, you directly attack the insurgents because now the civilian is not nearby, and you help in rehabilitating and supporting the people in every kind of terms. And the United Nations, nothing moves except in helicopters. So it was a humongous task. Some more missions. You can see a bottom left, a Mi-25 about to attack a target. It's got other family members of the rebels around, but the central one had the leadership, which we identified through intelligence. And with rocket firing, it was so calibrated that we got only the right hut and not the other, not the family members. So if you want to see how air power is so important, this is the map of Congo, and the blue part is the troubled area. The troubled area was almost 1100 kilometers in length and 500 kilometers in width. And there are large uninhabited areas. You could fly for 30 minutes without spotting any human, just green, nothing else. That kind of, and there was no roads. When we deployed in Congo, there were only 110 kilometers of road in that huge country, which is size of Europe, and only paved roads were only 110 kilometers. Rest was all tracks, muddy tracks, and that kind of stuff. The ruler of that country that time, Mobutu, believed that if you give roads, education will reach the people and they will rebel. So he had his own logic, because of which there were no roads. And then there is rapid movement of cargo and manpower, intermission support, offensive capability, that is firing, and critical in the overall concept of primacy of civilian protection. So civilian could feel protected because if the message came within 30 minutes, air power reached there to combat the rebels. That itself was a huge deterrent. You can see what kind of challenges the pilots face. It wasn't very unlike the northeast of our own country, but the northeast has, you'll be surprised, about 1,000 helipads. Congo didn't have a helipad anywhere. Fortunately, the Congolese are fond of football. So there were these small fields where you could put down the aircraft. And the UN is a very bureaucrat system. If you think our babus are bureaucrats, then you haven't seen the United Nations. They beat every babu in town. And nobody wants to take responsibility. Everybody wants his tail to be clear. So he asks you, go fire, do whatever you want to, but you are responsible for that. And this is a multinational setting, so you can imagine the difficulty. And despite that, the Indian Air Force redefined, in fact, it's in their own manual of robust peacekeeping, was actually defined during in MONUC by the Indian Air Force, and subsequently in 2004, 2005, the Indian Army 2 brigades came up. And then, of course, it was a complete different example. UN, you'll be surprised, all operational missions finally boil down to financial decisions. This is ultimate babugiri. Even in our country, I think the finance department doesn't, interfere if there's a HADR operation going on, but they do. The biggest challenge for us was force protection of the United Nations. Just to give you an example, if a helicopter was shot or went down, the UN did not cover it in any way. There was no insurance. So technically speaking, who will take a risk? But as Indians, we did. But the more important thing was, on ground, we were so vulnerable because the UN washed its hands off. Of course, we had taken a company of Indian Army, and subsequently when the brigades fetched up, the protection also fetched up. You can see a convoy. The photograph has been taken by a Mi-25. They wouldn't dare, even with all those proper Caspirs and those armored vehicles, they wouldn't dare to go anywhere unless there was air cover and the Mi-25 is ready to fire. All right, rather than go through this, there were other kinds of training also, all air related, that the Air Force did. Training observers so they could direct the fire correctly, so that collateral damage would be avoided. I will just give you an example. There was a town called Bukavu, and one day it fell to rebels. It didn't fall suddenly. It took 4 to 5 days, or rather 10 days. And all the time while they were moving there, South Africans and other countries who had contributed, troops were so well armed that they could have easily taken on this force. But no one fired a shot. They didn't give any clearance to fire a shot. This force fetched up into Bukavu, took over the town, pillaged, raped, did whatever they wanted to with that town for 10 days. The only time the UN got panicky was when the UN headquarters was getting surrounded. That's when they gave clearance to fire, and our Mi-25 went. Just one burst of gunfire and the entire rebel force which had taken over this town just melted away. So, it was very simple psychologically to win this battle, but knowing the UN is quite a waste of time. These are just the figures that despite so many rocket firing, front gun usage, etc., the bottom line in the IF missions was not one single collateral damage. So, everybody talks about collateral damage. It's inevitable. We've been able to pull it off so far. I'll close with this example, strange bedfellows. And 2003, there was this mission. The rebels had come and killed some 40 civilians, and they were running away. Early morning, we were launched, and we had Mi-25 cover on top. And with Mi-17, we took these soldiers from Pakistan, the Pakistani soldiers. And beautiful operation. Indian helicopters, Pakistani soldiers. We dropped them. We dropped a team well ahead to set up an ambush. We dropped one right behind them so they could chase them into the ambush. And it was one of the biggest successes of MONUC for the last decade or so. After that, when we came back, the Pakistanis requested, because they don't officially drink and all, but otherwise they drink more than us. So they came to our camp, and while drinking, we realized I had taken part in Kargil as a CO of a Mi-17 unit. These were the same Baluch regiments which had taken part in Kargil war, and Musharraf had sent them as a reward to Congo. So strange bedfellows, I meant that. Thank you.
Isser, for telling us some very interesting anecdotes about the UN peacekeeping operations. Over to you, Anchit, for the last.
Thank you. Thank you, sir, for having me over here. As we end this session today and we talk about Air Force and its centennial decade, I'm going to take you back to the first decade, actually. I was given the unviable task in a few minutes to talk about IF heritage. It's very difficult to talk about heritage in a few minutes, so I'm going to take a shot at that. And when I summarized the few slides I put together, I only came across the words blood and guts. And I'm going to talk a little bit about why I think blood and guts defines it well. Let's go back to our roots a little bit. The 1930s, when we were formed. The Air Force was formed against a lot of odds. The first, it was a stolen child from the army. In the 1920s and 30s, when the idea of an independent Indian Air Force was being thought of, the army said it should be an arm of the army. And there was a lot of debate. Both sides of the arguments made, quite rightly. But ultimately, the RAF chief in India at that time prevailed, and the Indian Air Force emerged as an independent body. However, the army, some may say even till today, believes that it's a stolen child. It was also a stepbrother to the RAF. The RAF was operating in India in the Waziristan sector for nearly a decade and a half before the Indian Air Force was formed. And it had 8 to 10 squadrons. The Indian Air Force was formed with one flight. It did not get the respect of the RAF. So people doing the same task did not respect it enough. And therefore it always remained a stepbrother. It did not have a permanent cadre. Between 1932 and 1939, a sum total of 20 officers were commissioned. All RAF Cranwell commissioned and permanent commission. After that, for nearly 3 years, we had 300 officers join us as volunteers, all in a rush of the World War II. Imagine an organization that has its foundation on volunteers. There is no permanent cadre. Well, if we thought that was enough, it did not have aircraft. It was formed with obsolete aircraft that it could rumble up from here and there. Some of the Maharajas gave money to put up some units. RAF gave some of its old aircraft. One squadron we could not raise our second squadron for nearly 10 years. When we raised our first squadron, it was actually just one flight for 5 years. Those, ladies and gentlemen, were the odds against which the Indian Air Force was formed. Well, that didn't stop them. They went into Waziristan in 1936, within 4 years, a bastion that the RAF was trying to solve for nearly 20 years. They had to fight their way to just get the opportunity to do that. Then came the big Burma campaign of 1942. Again, it was not Indian Air Force that was the first choice to put them in Burma. The RAF had put up everything that they could. And when they were left with nothing more, they said, why don't we push the Indian Air Force also in? And they did well. We'll talk a little bit about that. And finally, Kashmir. 1947, we are split up. Nearly 25% of the strength of the Indian Air Force goes to Pakistan, including a lot of senior officers who had played a vital role in forming the nucleus of the Indian Air Force. And within weeks or days of that, you're asked to launch a mission in an area which has no infrastructure. There is no aviation that was carried out in Kashmir ever prior to 1947. So here are two very different things happening. You're formed against all odds. Who are you? What is your identity? And here you are within the first 15 years of your existence thrust into 3 very diverse operations. I'll talk a little bit about just Waziristan very quickly in a minute. Barren province to the west, Afghan tribes that you're fighting against to protect the British border. Air Force acts as an arm of the army to support the ground offensive. That is what the RAF did for a very long time. In 1936, the Indian Air Force said, we need a chance. We need to get into combat. We need to get into operations. And they did that in 1936 for the first time. Aspi engineer, who later on became the chief, earned the first gallantry award flying in the Waziristan operations. There were numerous stories of bravery that came out of Waziristan, and for the first time, the stepbrother of the RAF started to get the respect of a real brother. That is the impact of Waziristan to the heritage of Indian Air Force. Burma, you all must have read a lot about it. I'll talk about just 2 squadrons. One squadron under Arjun Singh, ironically sent together with 28th Squadron RAF to lift the siege of Imphal. Nothing could go into Imphal, and they had to go in. With Hurricane aircrafts, which were originally meant only for photo missions. But here they were asked to do everything. Go behind enemy lines, strafe, kill as much as you could, do what you could. They lost 9 pilots, many more aircraft than 9, but they earned 9 DFCs in the process. 6 squadron against under the mesmerizing Meher Singh, assisting the 14th Army. Again, some very, very fascinating flying. If you have not read about the flying that Indian Air Force did in Burma, I highly recommend you should look at that. He too lost 20 of his pilots. He too earned a DFC. In fact, he earned an award equivalent to a MVC. Lord Mountbatten, the Supreme Commander, came down to give awards to both of them. That was the impact the Indian Air Force had in Burma. And very quickly about Kashmir. We had no airstrips. We first landed in Srinagar, we then landed in Leh, and we then landed in Punj. Without an aircraft, without a map, without an aircrew. If that was not enough, we ended up rolling out bombs out of the Dakota in Punj. This is what the Indian Air Force was doing despite all the odds. And before I bring it all together to a close, there's one very important thing you all should keep in mind about heritage of the Indian Air Force. The nucleus of heritage of Indian Air Force is one squadron. For nearly the first decade of its existence, this was the only squadron that existed. Every squadron that was formed till independence either had its aircraft, its aircrew, or its commanding officer coming from one squadron. It was all one big family. And when I think of all of these things put together, what is the heritage that we had? I think it's just a band of brothers. The Indian Air Force was not formed on units. It was not formed on aircraft. It was formed on the brotherhood of certain men who said, we want to be here for a sense of purpose and for a greater good. And ladies and gentlemen, that heritage has been passed along. Even today, if you go to a unit of an Indian Air Force, it's about the brotherhood. It's about their peers. It's about their mentors. It's about their instructors. These few men epitomize what we think of the Indian Air Force today. These are photos that you have seen. These are people you would have heard of. Meher Singh, Jumbo Majumdar, Arjun Singh, P.C. Lal, Subroto Mukherjee, all very famous characters now who inspire us. But they all came together for a sense of purpose. They were all brave, they were skilled, they were independent-minded. If you hear interviews from them from that era about each other, they will talk about mutual respect. They will talk about how against all of these odds they came together. And they will talk about the fact that they did it for themselves, for their peers and for their unit, not for the nation. The concept of a nation state under a British monarchy did not exist as such. Therefore, I end by saying in our centennial decade, our inheritance goes back to our first decade. And the only single inheritance is the one single identity of being band of brothers. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anchit, for giving us a glimpse of the Indian Air Force heritage from Waziristan to Burma to Kashmir. I think 3 cheers to the band of brothers in blue, which touches the sky with glory whenever it's asked for. And we are open now to the questions if anybody in the audience has any. Yeah.
I am afraid it's a bit of a long question, sir. My source for this is an article in Vayu magazine, the latest issue by a journalist called Mr. Chattopadhyay. He had an interview with an official from Hindustan Aeronautics Limited, who stated that the company is currently working on creating a production line of 24 aircraft per year to deliver an initial order of 83 Tejas by 2028. Now, in the meantime, I believe that another order for a further 97 aircraft worth $8 billion United States dollars has either been finalized or is in the process of being finalized, depending on which source I use, to acquire additional aircraft. Now, for $8 billion, at a price of $125 million a jet, I can buy about 60 F-35s. I can buy about 130 Greitens, and I can even get about 114 F-16 Block 70-72 Vipers. Not even the 21, but the Block 70. And in fact, Taiwan negotiated that deal down from $70 million to $50 million per jet. So now that I understand we don't have too many resources. So why are we squandering $8 billion on a jet that brings absolutely no BVR weapons or standoff munitions into our Air Force?
But I think it's outside the ambit of the session that we've had this afternoon. I can only, tell you that the emphasis today is on self-dependency and Atmanirbhar Bharat. And the issue of 93 or 97 aircraft is still under deliberation. And the way I see it, in the future, you're going to see the Tejas replacing the MiG-21 fleet in large measure. The Indian Air Force will basically comprise of these aircraft only. And obviously, we don't want to buy stuff from outside. You've seen the Ukraine war, Russia war, and you've seen what self-dependency entails. Yeah, at the back, there was a question.
Yeah, thank you all for your support. I attend Aero India 2023, Bangalore. That was really stunning and it's fabulous. My question is, in upcoming next generations, air superiority is main. We are seeing in the wars right now. In upcoming years, are we going to produce more Tejas, Mark 1A, Mark 2, that fighter jets? And second thing is, are we planning for unmanned air fighter jets? Are we capable of that?
I think, like I said earlier, Tejas is happening. Tejas Mark 2 will also happen, and AMCA will also happen, for which the government has already allocated funds. And there is also, on the unmanned aircraft also, there is a plan in place, so it is going to happen.
So many countries like US, Russia, in long-range bombers like B-2, B-21 Raiders, while you have cheaper and very reliable missiles for bombing other countries. So why do these countries maintain fleet of bombers?
The concept of bombers from the World War days to now, when you have aircraft which are multi-role, like it was covered by Air Vice Marshal Tejbir, today a Rafale can fly 10 hours non-stop and deliver weapons to your liking or wanting. There is no, if you see the Air Force strength today, we are down to 29, 30 squadrons with an authorized sanction strength of 42 squadrons. So obviously there is no money. It's, if I have so much of money, then I will get whatever I want. So when my fighter aircraft can do the task that the Air Force desires, I don't think we need any bombers as such. And the days of that bombers are over, in my opinion.
Yes, it's the last
question. Yeah.
So my question was basically, like I know the procurement questions that other people ask about expensive Indian Atmanirbhar equipment. I'm in support of that, but on your follow-up question on like 33 squadrons that Air Force have now today, so how is Air Force planning to cope up that difference in requirement versus what we have right now? Because our enemies or our neighbors are increasing their strength every day. So how are we planning to increase it in an efficient manner?
I think to answer your question, it is not always the Air Force with a larger strength or the numbers that wins the war. If you look at conflicts in the last 70, 80, 90 years, it is always the inferior force which has won the war. So you have to use disruptive technologies, you have to use strategy, you have to use tactics, and at the end of the day, it is the man behind the machine. It's the professional soldier actually who makes the difference. So I'll just finish by saying that. You want to add something?
The good news may be that, for example, just as an example, the JF-17, Myanmar has grounded its entire fleet. Pakistan is in real bad shape. So, people may go by numbers of squadrons, etc. Take it with a pinch of salt. Anything Chinese remains like the Chinese goods that we used to consume.
At the end, I'd like to thank the panel, and I'd also like to mention, that I'm also privileged to have Anchit, who's a contributor to this book, The Indian Air Force and its Centennial Decade, as also Group Captain Dr. Swaim Prakash Singh, who's also, a co-editor without whose help this book would not have been possible, and he's also contributed to the book. May I request you all for a big round of applause for
Yes.
all four on the panel over there. Thank you.
So thank you. That was my line, but you took that line, and that makes sense. Yes, we should clap for the gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen. And thank you so much for joining us. And I totally agree with you. There's actually the man behind the machine that matters, not actually the machine, which is, it cannot operate itself, right? So thank you so much. May I request our team to give you, present you with the mementos. And can I please request you to pose for the cameras? Thank you very much, gentlemen.